Marcus Chen had seen many strange things since humanity joined the Galactic Concord. But nothing had prepared him for the day he met her. The year was 2247, and humans had been part of the galactic community for exactly 23 years, which was barely a blink in cosmic terms, but long enough for other species to form opinions about the newcomers from Earth. Most of those opinions were not kind. The diplomatic ringworld, called Serenity Prime, floated in the space between three star systems. A massive structure built by ancient beings who had long since vanished into the cosmic dust. And now it served as neutral ground for the 47 species of the Concord. Marcus worked there as a cultural attaché, which was a fancy way of saying he explained human behavior to confused aliens and apologized when his fellow humans did something the rest of the galaxy found disturbing. Today, his job was simple. Welcome a delegation of Valori and show them around the human quarter of the station. The Valori were famous across the galaxy for one thing above all else, and that was their complete and total lack of visible emotion. They stood 7 feet tall with silver skin that seemed to shimmer under any light, and their faces remained as still as carved stone. No matter what happened around them, they communicated through micro-expressions, so tiny that most species could not even see them, and they considered any display of obvious emotion to be a sign of mental illness. Marcus had read all the briefing documents, and he had prepared himself to be as calm and professional as possible. He waited at the docking bay with his hands clasped behind his back, trying very hard not to smile or frown or show any expression at all. The Valori ship arrived without fanfare, a sleek silver vessel that matched their skin perfectly, and when the doors opened, 5 tall figures walked out in perfect formation. 4 of them looked exactly like what Marcus expected, with blank faces and measured steps that made no sound on the metal floor, but the 5th one was different. She walked at the back of the group, and Marcus noticed right away that her eyes moved too much, darting around the docking bay with what he could only describe as curiosity. Her name was Kiravel Soenti, and she was introduced as the liaison assigned to study human cultural practices. When Marcus shook her hand in the human greeting style, her silver fingers trembled just slightly, and he saw something flash across her face that the other Valori would never show. It looked almost like nervousness. "Welcome to Serenity Prime," Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral and calm. The lead Valori, a stern figure named High Observatorith, inclined his head by exactly 3 degrees, which Marcus knew from his studies was the Valori equivalent of a warm greeting. "We thank you for receiving us," Torith said in a voice that carried no tone whatsoever. "We are here to observe and document human emotional behaviors for the archives." Marcus nodded and began the tour, leading them through the corridors of the human quarter while explaining the various facilities. The other Valori observed everything with clinical detachment, occasionally making notes on their holographic devices, but Kiravel kept falling behind. Stopping to look at things that caught her attention, she paused at a window where human children were playing in a recreation area, and Marcus saw her tilt her head in a way that seemed almost wistful. He slowed his pace to walk beside her while the others moved ahead. "Is something wrong?" he asked, quiet Kiravel, startled at his voice. And for just a moment her composure cracked completely, showing an expression of surprise that would have horrified her companions. "I apologize," she whispered, quickly smoothing her face back to neutral. "I was merely observing the small humans and their activities." "You mean the kids playing?" Marcus said with a small smile. "Yeah, they do that a lot. It is kind of their whole thing." Kiravel looked at him with wide silver eyes, and he realized she was studying his smile like it was the most fascinating thing she had ever seen. "You show your teeth when you make that expression," she said. "On many worlds that would be a threat display. On Earth it means I am happy," Marcus said. "Or at least amused." "Happy." Kiravel repeated the word like she was tasting it. "I have read about this concept extensively. Something in her voice made Marcus pause. A hint of longing that did not belong in any Valori speech pattern over the next several days. Marcus found himself assigned specifically to Kiravel, while the other Valori conducted their formal observations. She asked him questions constantly. Endless questions about human emotions and how they felt and why humans did not simply suppress them like rational beings. At first, Marcus thought she was just thorough in her research. But slowly he began to realize the truth. Kiravel was not studying human emotions from academic curiosity. Alone, she was studying them because she felt them too. It happened on the 5th day of the delegation's visit, when Marcus invited her to watch a human film as part of her cultural education. He chose a classic story about a dog who waited years for his owner to return, thinking it would be a gentle introduction to human storytelling. He did not expect Kiravel to start crying. Tears rolled down her silver cheeks, and she made a sound that was half gasp and half sob. And her whole body shook with an emotion she had clearly never been allowed to express. Marcus sat frozen for a moment, completely unsure what to do in all his training about Valori customs. No one had ever mentioned what to do if one of them started weeping, so he did what any human would do. He grabbed a box of tissues from the table and held them out to her. "Here," he said gently. "Yeah, that one gets me too." Kiravel looked at the tissues, then looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw something breaking and rebuilding all at once. She took a tissue and wiped her face. Still crying, still trembling. "I am defective," she whispered. "I have always been defective. My neural pathways developed incorrectly, and I feel things I should not feel. My people have hidden me away in distant postings because I am an embarrassment to my family line." Marcus sat down beside her, keeping his movements slow and calm. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. She nodded, silver tears still falling. "On Earth we do not call that defective," Marcus said. "We call that being alive." Kiravel stared at him like he had just told her the secrets of the universe. "And maybe in a way he had. Your species truly believes that?" she asked. "That feeling emotions this strongly is not a malfunction?" "We believe it is the whole point," Marcus said. "What good is existing if you do not feel anything about it?" For the first time since she arrived, Kiravel smiled. A real smile that lit up her silver features and made her look like an entirely different person. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like to learn more about this philosophy." And that was how it started. Not with grand gestures or cosmic destiny, but with a box of tissues and a sad movie about a dog. Marcus did not know it yet, but his life was about to become far more complicated and far more wonderful than he had ever imagined, because Kiravel was not just any alien learning about human emotions. She was about to become the most important person in his universe, and she was going to feel every single moment of it with an intensity that would shake the foundations of galactic diplomacy itself. But that night, in the soft glow of the viewing room, they were just two people who understood something important about each other, and sometimes that is all it takes to change everything. 6 months had passed since that night in the viewing room, and Marcus Chen's life had become something he could never have predicted. Valori delegation had completed their official observations and returned home, but Kiravel had requested an extended assignment on Serenity Prime for continued research into human culture. Everyone knew the real reason she stayed. Even if no one said it out loud, Marcus and Kiravel had become inseparable, spending every free moment together while she explored the vast landscape of human emotional experience with him as her guide. She approached love the same way she approached everything else, with overwhelming intensity that left Marcus both amazed and occasionally exhausted. The first time she realized she had romantic feelings for him, she did not simply tell him about it. She showed up at his quarters at 3 a.m, tears streaming down her silver face, and declared that her cardiovascular system was malfunctioning because it kept beating faster Whenever she thought about him, Marcus had spent 20 minutes explaining that this was called having a crush before she finally stopped panicking. But that was just the beginning. Kiravel experienced every stage of falling in love like a supernova explosion. Brilliant and powerful, and impossible to ignore when Marcus took too long to respond to a message. She sent 47 follow-up messages in a single hour, each one more worried than the last. The final message had simply said, "I have calculated the probability of you being killed by the station's cleaning drones, and it is not 0. Please respond immediately." Marcus learned to keep his communication device with him at all times. When he remembered her favorite synthesized nutrient blend and brought her a container of it one morning, Kiravel wept with joy for 15 minutes straight. She kept the empty container as a memento, placing it on a shelf in her quarters like a sacred artifact. Marcus found this both touching and slightly concerning. His human friends on the station had mixed reactions to the relationship. His best friend David, who worked in engineering, pulled him aside one day in the cafeteria with a serious expression. "Dude," David said, shaking his head, "she is a lot." Marcus just shrugged and smiled. "Have you met humans?" he asked. "We are all a lot. She just does not hide it." David could not argue with that logic. The relationship faced its first real test when Marcus attended a diplomatic reception with Kiravel by his side. Ambassador Krethvos of the Krethni Dominion, a reptilian species known for their arrogance, made a comment within earshot of Kiravel. "I still do not understand why the Concord admitted humans," the ambassador said to his companion. "They are barely more intelligent than the beasts they evolved from." Marcus was ready to let it go. Used to such comments after years of diplomatic work, Kiravel was not. She turned on the ambassador with eyes blazing silver fire. And what followed was a 40-minute lecture on human achievements that left every being in the room stunned. She spoke about human art and music and literature, about their capacity to create beauty from suffering and hope from despair. She detailed their scientific accomplishments, from splitting the atom to mapping their own genome to reaching for the stars. When they had barely learned to fly, she described their history of overcoming impossible odds, of surviving ice ages and plagues and wars, and still finding reasons to love and laugh and dream. By the time she finished, Ambassador Krethvos looked like he wanted to crawl under the nearest table, and several other diplomats were quietly applauding. Marcus had never been more attracted to anyone in his entire life, but the incident created ripples throughout the Concord. Other species began to watch Marcus and Kiravel with new eyes, not just as an unusual couple, but as something that challenged their understanding of the universe. The Valori had always been seen as the pinnacle of civilized development. Their emotional suppression, considered the height of rational evolution, humans had always been seen as primitives. Their emotional displays considered evidence of inferior cognitive development. But here was a Valori who felt like a human, and instead of being diminished by it, she seemed more alive than any of her kind that others had ever encountered. Whispered questions began to spread through the diplomatic circles of Serenity Prime. What did it feel like to love that deeply? What did it mean to experience joy so strongly that it brought tears? Were humans truly broken? Or had they discovered something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten? Marcus noticed the change in how other species looked at them, but he was too busy planning something important to give it much thought. He had been carrying a small box in his pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. That moment came on a viewing platform, overlooking the rings of a gas giant that the station orbited. The light from the rings painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and Kiravel stood at the window with tears already forming in her eyes just from the beauty of the view. She cried at beautiful things almost as often as she cried at sad things. And Marcus had learned to always carry tissues. "Kira," he said. Using the shortened name she only allowed him to use, she turned to look at him, and her expression shifted to concern when she saw how serious his face was. "What is wrong?" She asked immediately. Are you ill? Is someone dead? Has the station's life support failed? I knew we should have checked the maintenance logs more carefully. Marcus laughed and took her hands in his. Nothing is wrong, he said. Everything is right, actually. More right than it has ever been. He lowered himself to one knee, and Kiravel's eyes went wide. I do not know what the Valori tradition is for this, Marcus said, pulling out the small box. But on Earth, when you find someone you want to spend your life with, you ask them a question. He opened the box to reveal a ring, simple silver band with a small blue stone that matched the color of Earth's sky. Kiravel Sorinthi, will you marry me? For a long moment, Kiravel did not move, did not speak, did not even seem to breathe. Then she made a sound that was somewhere between a scream and a sob. And she pulled Marcus to his feet and wrapped her arms around him so tightly that he genuinely worried about his ribs. Yes, she cried. Yes, yes, yes. 1,000 times. Yes. 1,000,000 times. Yes. Every yes that has ever existed and will ever exist. In all of time and space. She was crying so hard that she could barely get the words out. And Marcus was crying too now, because her emotions had always been contagious. They stood there in the golden light of the gas giant's rings. Two beings from different worlds holding each other and weeping with joy. The station security system flagged the platform for unusual activity. And a concerned guard came to investigate. He found them still hugging and crying. And after a quick explanation, he left them alone with a smile on his face. Love, he thought as he walked away, was apparently universal, even when the species were not Kiravel cried for 3 hours after the proposal. Taking breaks only to look at the ring on her finger and start crying again, Marcus sat with her through all of it, handing her tissues and holding her hand. I have to tell everyone, Kiravel finally said when she had calmed down enough to speak clearly. I have to tell absolutely everyone immediately, and she did by the next morning. Half the station knew about the engagement, and messages were flying across the galaxy to every corner of known space. The human and the Valori were getting married. Nothing in the galaxy would ever be quite the same again. The news of the engagement spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and the reactions ranged from enthusiastic support to horrified outrage. Marcus had expected some pushback, but he had not expected the formal summons that arrived from the Valori High Council. 3 days after the announcement, the message was addressed to Kiravel, and it demanded her immediate return to the homeworld for what they called cognitive recalibration. Marcus watched her read the message, watched her silver face cycle through fear and anger, and finally something that looked like determination. They want to fix me, she said quietly. They want to suppress the part of me that feels things. They have always wanted this. She looked up at Marcus with eyes that burned with defiance. I am not going back. Marcus took her hand. They cannot force you to return, he said. You are assigned to a diplomatic post on neutral ground. And besides, he added with a small smile, you are about to become half-human by marriage. And we are very stubborn about protecting our own. Kiravel laughed through her tears, which was becoming her standard emotional state these days. The refusal to return created a political situation that the diplomats on Serenity Prime had to carefully navigate. But eventually, the Valori High Council backed down. They could not afford an incident with humanity, especially not over something as embarrassing as an emotional defective who had chosen to marry one of them, but then something unexpected happened. Ed Kravel received a private message from her family, the first contact she had from them in years. Her parents and her younger sister wanted to attend the wedding. They did not understand her choices, and they certainly did not approve, but she was still their daughter, and they wanted to be there. Kiravel cried for 6 hours after reading that message, and Marcus started to wonder if he should buy tissue stock. The wedding planning began in earnest, and it quickly became the most complicated project either of them had ever undertaken. The first issue was the ceremony itself. Valori Tradition required the entire wedding to be conducted in complete silence, with the couple simply standing together for 2 hours while guests observed their micro-expression shaman. Tradition involved vows and speeches and music, and dancing and someone's drunk uncle making inappropriate toasts. Finding a middle ground seemed impossible. What if we do both? Kiravel suggested one evening. 2 ceremonies, one Valori and one human? Marcus considered this. That could work, he said. But you know my family. A human ceremony is going to be loud. I am counting on it. Kiravel said with genuine excitement. I have been reading about human wedding traditions extensively, and I am very interested in the ritual called the chicken dance. Marcus was not sure how to explain that the chicken dance was not actually a sacred ritual, but he decided to let her find out on her own. The next challenge was the guest list between Marcus's human friends and family, Kiravel's Valori relatives, and the various diplomatic contacts they had made on the station. The list grew to over 500 beings from 16 different species. The venue coordinator, a patient woman named Sandra, developed a permanent twitch in her left eye from trying to accommodate all the different species. Requirements: the Crethony. Delegation needed a heat lamp section. The aquatic. Delphini observers required a water tank with viewing screens. The Torvali traders insisted on sitting near the exits in case they needed to make a quick escape, which was apparently just a cultural habit and not a reflection on the wedding itself. Marcus's mother arrived on the station a week before the wedding, and she immediately took charge in the way that only mothers can. Her first question upon meeting Kiravel was, "Can you eat cake?" Kiravel had no idea what cake was, but she was immediately and intensely interested in finding out. Mrs. Chun spent an entire afternoon introducing her future daughter-in-law to various earth desserts, and by the end of it, Kiravel had declared chocolate to be the greatest achievement in human history. She cried when she tasted ice cream for the first time, and Mrs. Shun officially adopted her on the spot. The bachelor and bachelorette parties presented their own challenges. Marcus's party was relatively simple, just drinks with David and some other friends from the station, though it did end with them accidentally triggering a security alert when David tried to reprogram a cleaning drone to bring them more snacks. Val's party was considerably more eventful. She had researched human bachelorette traditions with the same intensity she brought to everything else, and she was determined to have an authentic experience. This involved a large amount of alcohol that Valori physiology could not actually metabolize properly, resulting in Kiravel becoming what could only be described as aggressively affectionate toward everyone she encountered. She hugged 17 different diplomats, told the station commander that he had a very symmetrical face, and somehow ended up in an arm wrestling competition with a massive Vorkath warrior. She lost badly, but the Vorkath was so impressed by her enthusiasm that he declared her an honorary warrior of his clan the next morning. Kiravel woke up with no memory of the previous night and a ceremonial Vorkath battle bracer on her wrist that she could not figure out how to remove. Marcus found the whole thing hilarious, which made Kiravel cry because she was so happy that she had found someone who loved her even when she was being ridiculous. A Valori delegation arrived 5 days before the wedding, sent by the High Council to officially observe the ritual. They stood in corners of every room, taking notes on holographic devices and looking perpetually confused by everything they witnessed. One of them witnessed the wedding rehearsal dinner and had to excuse himself when humans started clinking glasses and cheering. "They are making so much noise," he whispered to his colleague. "Is this a form of attack?" But not everything was lighthearted. Marcus started noticing strange things in the days leading up to the wedding. Messages that seemed to be monitoring his communications, unfamiliar faces that appeared wherever he and Kiravel went, a formal complaint filed with station administration claiming that the wedding posed a cognitive hazard to galactic peace. Someone in the Concord did not want this wedding to happen, and they were working very hard to stop it. Marcus brought his concerns to the station's security chief. A grizzled veteran named Commander Torres listened carefully, then nodded with grim understanding. "I have heard rumblings," she said. "There is a faction that sees human emotional influence as a threat to galactic stability. They think that if this wedding happens, it will encourage other species to embrace their emotions instead of suppressing them. And that is a bad thing?" Marcus asked. Torres smiled sadly. "To beings who have spent millennia convincing themselves that feeling nothing is the height of civilization? Yes, it terrifies them." She put a hand on his shoulder. "But do not worry. I have increased security for the ceremony. No one is going to ruin your wedding on my watch." Marcus thanked her and returned to Caravel, who was in the middle of rewriting her wedding vows for the 63rd time. She looked up at him with eyes full of worry, somehow sensing that something was wrong. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Marcus sat down beside her and took her hand. "Everything is going to be perfect," he said, hoping that saying it out loud would make it true. 3 days until the wedding, and the galaxy was holding its breath. The wedding day arrived with golden light streaming through the biodome's transparent walls, and Marcus Chun stood at the altar trying to remember how to breathe. The venue was beautiful beyond anything he could have imagined. Flowers from Earth filled one half of the space. Roses and lily and sunflowers that his mother had insisted on, while luminescent plants from Valori Prime filled the other half. Glowing softly in shades of silver and blue, 500 guests filled the seats, representing 16 different species and more cultural traditions than anyone could count. The Crethani sat under their heat lamps looking uncomfortable, but present. The Delphini observers watched from their water tank, their translator devices broadcasting quiet commentary. Vorkith warrior who had arm wrestled Caravel sat in the front row wearing his ceremonial armor and occasionally growling at anyone who made too much noise. Marcus's family filled the left side of the aisle, a sea of human faces ranging from his beaming mother to his slightly nervous father to his uncle Pete, who had already found the bar. Caravel's family sat on the right side. 3 silver figures who looked desperately out of their depth. Her mother kept glancing around at all the emotional displays happening nearby, her hands gripped tightly in her lap. Her father stared straight ahead with the focused determination of someone trying very hard not to feel anything. Her younger sister, barely an adult by Valori standards, watched everything with wide, curious eyes that reminded Marcus painfully of Caravel. David stood beside Marcus as his best man, looking surprisingly dignified in his formal attire. "You ready for this?" David whispered. "I have been ready for 6 months," Marcus whispered back. "I just want her to walk down that aisle already," as if summoned by his words. The music began to play. The biodome speakers filled the space with a gentle melody, a piece that Caravel had chosen herself. After listening to approximately 3,000 human songs and crying at most of them, the doors at the back of the venue opened, and there she was. Caravel wore a dress that blended human and Valori traditions. White fabric that flowed like water, decorated with silver threads that caught the light and seemed to glow. Her silver skin shimmered, and her eyes were already filled with tears. And she was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen. She walked down the aisle on trembling legs, and Marcus could see her trying so hard to maintain some composure. She made it exactly halfway before the composure shattered completely. The tears started flowing freely, and her breath came in short gasps, and she had to stop walking just to press her hands against her face and sob. The Valori observers stiffened in horror at this display. The human guests smiled with understanding, some of them crying. To Marcus did not wait for her to compose herself. He walked down from the altar, took her hands in his, and gently guided her the rest of the way. "I am sorry," she whispered through her tears. I am being ridiculous. You are being perfect, he whispered back. You are always perfect. They reached the altar together, hand in hand. And the officiant began the ceremony. The first portion was conducted in traditional Valori style. 2 minutes of silence during which the couple was supposed to communicate through micro-expressions. Elena Karevel tried her best. But her face kept breaking into obvious smiles, and her tears kept falling. And by the end of the 2 minutes, she had violated approximately every Valori ceremonial protocol ever written. Her parents watched with expressions that might have been embarrassment, but also might have been something else entirely. Then came the human portion. The exchange of vows. Marcus went first, keeping his words simple and honest. Kiravel, he said, I never expected to find someone who feels things as deeply as you do. You have shown me that there is nothing more beautiful than a heart that holds nothing back. I promise to stand beside you through every tear and every laugh and every overwhelming moment. For the rest of our lives. Then it was Kiravel's turn. She had rewritten her vows 89 times. And Marcus had no idea which version she had settled on. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Marcus, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I spent my entire life being told that I was broken, that the way I feel things was a defect that needed to be corrected. And then I met you, and you handed me tissues instead of criticism. You sat with me while I cried and told me that feeling things was the whole point of being alive. She had to stop to wipe her eyes before continuing. You taught me that I am not broken, she said. You taught me that I am simply more, and I want to spend my life being more with you, feeling everything the universe has to offer, and knowing that you will be there to feel it beside me. There were tears throughout the audience now. Humans and aliens alike touched by her words. The officiant smiled and opened his mouth to continue the ceremony. I object. The voice cut through the biodome like a blade, and every head turned toward the back of the venue. A tall figure in Concord formal robes strode down the aisle, his face set in cold disapproval. Marcus recognized him from the diplomatic briefings. Arbiter Soleth, a high-ranking official in the Concord's governance structure and a known advocate for emotional suppression policies. This union cannot proceed, Soleth declared. It represents a cognitive hazard to galactic peace. The emotional contamination of the Valori people must be prevented. He turned to face Kiravel with harsh eyes. Liaison Sornti, you will submit to emotional suppression treatment immediately, or you will be declared an exile from Valori society and stripped of all diplomatic standing. The biodome fell into shocked silence. Marcus stepped forward, his hands clenched at his sides. You cannot do this, he said. This is neutral ground. You have no authority here. I have the authority of the Concord Council, Soleth replied coldly. This human emotional infection has spread far enough. It ends today. Kiravel stood frozen, tears still streaming down her face, looking like a cornered animal. And then something extraordinary happened. A chair scraped against the floor on the Valori side of the aisle, and Kiravel's mother stood up. She was trembling visibly, which Marcus had never seen a Valori do in public. And when she spoke, her voice shook with something that sounded almost like anger. Our daughter is not an infection, she said. The words hung in the air. Impossible and revolutionary. Ka's father rose to stand beside his wife, his face cracking with an expression he had suppressed for 2 centuries. Kiravel is not broken, he said. She is simply built differently. And watching her these past few days has made me realize something I should have understood long ago. He looked at Soleth with eyes that held something dangerous. Perhaps she is not the defective one, he said. Perhaps we are. Kiravel's sister stood next, adding her silent support, and then, slowly, other beings began to rise. A Krethni veteran got to his feet. The same species whose ambassador had once insulted humanity. I have fought in wars across the galaxy, he said. and I have never seen courage like the courage it takes to feel things openly. This Valori female has more bravery than most warriors I have known. A group of Tarvali traders stood next. Our people trading goods, their leader said. But watching this couple has made me wonder if we have been trading away something more valuable, something we forgot we had, an elderly Silith. A species known for their 400-year lifespans and their philosophical detachment, rose from her seat with tears in her ancient eyes. I have lived for 400 years, she said, and I have never once cried until today. I did not know what I was missing. One by one, beings throughout the biodome stood, adding their voices to the chorus of support humans and aliens alike. Species that had been taught for millennia that emotions were weakness. All standing together against the old way of thinking. Commander Torres appeared at the back of the venue with a security team. Arbiter Solith, she said firmly, you are disrupting a private ceremony on neutral ground. I am going to have to ask you to leave. Solith looked around at the crowd of standing figures, at the tears and the determination on faces that had never shown such emotions before. For a moment he seemed ready to argue, to fight, to insist on the old ways, but even he could see that something had shifted. The galaxy was changing. Right here in this biodome, and no amount of Concord authority could stop it. This is not over, he said quietly. And then he turned and walked out. The doors closed behind him, and the biodome erupted in cheers. Marcus pulled Kiravel into his arms, and she sobbed against his chest. But these were different tears. These were the tears of someone who had just watched her family choose her over centuries of tradition. These were the tears of someone who'd just seen the galaxy begin to change. The officiant cleared his throat. Well then, he said with a warm smile, shall we continue? Marcus and Kiravel looked at each other with eyes full of love and tears and joy. Yes, they said together, let us finish this. The officiant spoke the final words of the ceremony, and Marcus Chun kissed his wife for the first time as a married man. Kiravel kissed him back with all the intensity she brought to everything in her life. And the biodome erupted in applause and cheers and various alien sounds of approval when they finally separated. Both of them were crying, and Marcus's Uncle Pete shouted, that is my nephew, loud enough to be heard on the other side of the station. The reception began immediately, transforming the biodome from a ceremonial space into the most chaotic party the Galactic Concord had ever witnessed. Tables filled with food from a dozen different worlds lined the edges of the room, and beings from 16 species mingled in ways that would have been unthinkable just hours before the Valori observers had abandoned their note-taking and were watching the festivities with expressions that looked almost like curiosity. One of them was approached by Marcus's Aunt Maria, who insisted on teaching him something called the Macarena. He attempted to follow her movements with precise Valori coordination, which somehow made the dance look both ridiculous and elegant at the same time. Kiravel's parents stood near the edge of the celebration, looking overwhelmed but determined to be present. Marcus watched his new mother-in-law observe a group of humans laughing together, her silver face showing tiny movements that might have been the beginning of a smile. His father-in-law had been cornered by Uncle Pete, who was explaining the rules of something called football with aggressive enthusiasm. The Valori listened with the patience of his species, but his eyes kept darting toward the dessert table where humans were cutting slices of cake. Go, Marcus said, appearing beside him. Go try some cake. I promise it will not kill you. His father-in-law looked at him with an expression that might have been gratitude, and then he walked toward the dessert table with purposeful steps. Marcus watched him take a small bite of chocolate cake, watched his silver face go through a series of micro-expressions, and then watched as a single tear rolled down his cheek. This is, the Valori said slowly, searching for words he had never needed before. This is acceptable. From anyone else, it would have been an insult. But Marcus knew enough about Valori culture to understand that acceptable was the highest praise his new father-in-law could verbally express. Caravel appeared at Marcus's side, her arm wrapping around his with familiar affection. "Your uncle is teaching my father about sports," she said. "I'm not sure my father understands what is happening, but he seems to be enjoying the attention." "Welcome to human family gatherings," Marcus said with a grin. "Confusion is part of the experience." The time came for the speeches, and Marcus braced himself for what he knew was coming. David went first as best man, telling embarrassing stories about Marcus that made Caravel laugh so hard she snorted, which made Marcus laugh, which made both of them cry. Then it was Uncle Pete's turn. He stood up with a glass in his hand and a suspicious wobble in his step, and Marcus prepared for the worst. But Uncle Pete surprised everyone. "I was not sure about this whole alien marriage thing," he admitted. "I mean, she is silver, and she cries at everything, and she sent my nephew 47 messages in 1 hour when he forgot to charge his communication device." The crowd chuckled, and Caravel hid her face against Marcus's shoulder. "But then I watched them together," Uncle Pete continued, his voice growing serious, "and I realized something important." He looked at Marcus and Caravel with surprisingly clear eyes. "We humans have always known that the best things in life are the things you feel," he said. "Joy and sorrow and love and hope. That is what makes life worth living, and somewhere along the way, the rest of the galaxy forgot that." He raised his glass. "But this girl from the stars, she remembered, or maybe she never forgot. And she found my nephew, who helped her understand that feeling everything is not a weakness." Uncle Pete smiled, and there were tears in his eyes now. To Marcus and Caravel, he said, "May you feel everything the universe has to offer, and may you always have someone to hand you tissues when it gets overwhelming." The crowd raised their glasses in a toast that brought together species who had never toasted together before. The Vorkath warrior bellowed something in his native language that the translator helpfully identified as "to honorable combat and equally honorable weeping." The dancing began after the speeches, and this was where the true chaos unfolded. Caravel had been waiting for this moment ever since she learned about human wedding traditions, and she threw herself onto the dance floor with reckless abandon. She had apparently studied every human dance form in existence. Though her understanding of when each dance was appropriate was somewhat limited, she attempted to waltz during a fast pop song, then tried to breakdance during a slow romantic ballad, and at one point she pulled Marcus's grandmother into something that looked like a tango but moved at 3 times the normal speed. Marcus's grandmother declared it the most fun she had in 30 years. The other Valori watched these displays with expressions ranging from horror to fascination to something that might have been envy. Caravel's sister finally stepped onto the dance floor herself, moving awkwardly at first, but then with growing confidence as a human teenager, showed her the basic steps of something called the robot. By the end of the song, the young Valori was laughing, actually laughing out loud, and her parents watched from the sidelines with tears. They did not try to hide. The party continued late into the station's artificial night, and when it finally ended, Marcus and Caravel retired to their quarters as husband and wife. They sat together by the window, looking out at the stars, both of them too emotionally exhausted to do anything but hold each other. "We actually did it," Caravel said quietly. "We actually got married." "We did," Marcus agreed. "And I think we might have accidentally started a revolution while we were at it." Caravel laughed, then cried, then laughed again, which was just her normal state of being at this point. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much it hurts, and I do not ever want it to stop hurting." "I love you too," Marcus said. Tears and messages and overwhelming emotions and all, they fell asleep in each other's arms. And outside their window, the galaxy continued to turn in the days and weeks and months that followed. The effects of the wedding rippled outward across known space. The footage of the ceremony had been broadcast on diplomatic channels, and beings everywhere watched a Valori weep with joy and a crowd of aliens stand in defense of emotional expression on the Valori homeworld. A quiet revolution began. Young Valori started questioning the suppression techniques they had been taught since birth, wondering what they might be missing, wondering if there was more to existence than cold logic and micro-expression. Some of the elders pushed back, insisting on tradition and proper behavior, but others remembered what it felt like to feel, remembered emotions they had buried centuries ago, and wondered if perhaps the young ones were right. The Crethany ambassador, who had once insulted humanity, requested a cultural exchange program with Earth, saying he wanted to understand these beings who felt so much and yet had accomplished so much. Despite it, the elderly Silith, who had cried for the first time at the wedding, wrote a philosophical treatise called The Value of Tears that became required reading at universities across 3 star systems, even the Concord Council began to quietly reconsider its policies on emotional regulation. Though this change would take decades to fully manifest, and through it all, Marcus and Kiravel lived their life together on Serenity Prime. She still cried at commercials and sent too many messages when he was late and felt everything at maximum volume. He still handed her tissues and sat with her through the overwhelming moments and loved her more with every passing day. 1 year after the wedding, Kiravel sat in their quarters reading something on her datapad when she suddenly burst into tears. Marcus looked up from his work, already reaching for the tissue box. "What is it this time?" he asked gently. "Sad news? Happy news? A particularly moving advertisement for cleaning products?" Kiravel shook her head, tears streaming down her silver face. "I just read an article," she managed to say, "about a Valori child on the homeworld who was diagnosed with my condition, emotional variance, and instead of sending her away for correction, her parents said they were going to let her feel things. They said they wanted her to be like the Valori who married the human." She looked at Marcus with eyes full of wonder and hope and overwhelming emotion. "We changed things," she whispered. "We actually changed things." Marcus crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried happy tears. "Yeah," he said softly, "I guess we did, because in the end, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not technology or military strength or political influence. It was the simple truth that Marcus had spoken on the night they first met. What is the point of existing if you do not feel anything about it? The galaxy was learning to feel again, 1 tear at a time, and it all started with a human who carried tissues and a silver-skinned alien who was never really broken at all. She was just more and more turned out to be exactly what the universe needed.